Right now, you have more to do than your team has the ability to do. Your backlog is full and your team is stretched thin. And somewhere in a meeting room near you, there are 3 different stakeholders, and each one is convinced that their project should be the #1 priority. Meanwhile, actual important work is sitting in a queue, just waiting for someone to notice it. If any part of that story sounds familiar, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're running a prioritization clinic. 3 different frameworks with real examples and a system that you can put to work starting tomorrow. Let me tell you about a client I worked with a few years back. Good people, smart leadership, and a strong product, and a backlog that was completely out of control. They had 68 active projects, and every single one of them was labeled as high priority. When I asked the team to show me their prioritization process, they pulled up a spreadsheet with a column that was labeled priority. That was filled top to bottom with the word high. I asked the project lead, well, how do you decide what to actually work on first? And she looked at me with that kind of exhausted honesty that only comes from about 18 months of this exact problem. And she said, whoever yelled loudest last week. I laughed. She did not. What was happening at that company happens at most organizations. Not because the people are incompetent or lazy, but because nobody ever stopped and built a real prioritization system. They were running on what I call the default approach, where the loudest voice, the squeakiest wheel, the biggest title, and whatever happened to catch someone's attention on a given Tuesday is what gets prioritized. The result of that is that teams are working hard and going nowhere useful. Important strategic projects just stalled because reactive, urgent work kept jumping the queue. Good ideas are dying in the backlog, not because they were bad ideas, but because nobody had a consistent way to rank them against each other. Here's what I typically see when organizations operate without a real prioritization framework. The first is a HIPPO-driven prioritization, and HIPPO is an acronym, HIPPO, that stands for highest paid person's opinion. The project that gets attention is the one that is championed by whoever has the most authority in the room. The HIPPO doesn't need a business case. The HIPPO doesn't need data. The HIPPO just needs to say it matters. And then everyone else defaults to agreement because the alternative is an awkward conversation about why the boss's idea is not the best use of the team's time. The second failure mode is the squeaky wheel system. Whoever asks for their project the most persistently or the most loudly wins. This rewards people who are good at lobbying and then punishes people who are heads down doing actual work. It has absolutely nothing to do with value. And the third failure mode is gut feel disguised as strategy. An experienced leader makes a call that seems reasonable, and because it usually is, nobody questions the process until the day it's not reasonable, and at which point nobody has a framework to push back with. Those 3 failure modes share one root cause. There is no common currency for comparing projects. When everything is evaluated differently by different people using different criteria, you cannot make consistently good decisions. You can only make decisions and hope. Here's what's interesting. Most people have heard of prioritization frameworks, and a fair number of you have sat through a presentation somewhere that mentioned things like Rice or Moscow. Maybe you even took notes, and yet you still have not implemented a system. Why? And there's a few reasons to the question of why. The first one is the frameworks are almost always presented in the most academic, dry, and impractical way possible. You get a formula on a slide and a list of definitions, and then the presenter says, and that's how you prioritize your backlog. Nobody left that seminar knowing how to actually run the process with the team. Second reason is there's always the sense that prioritization frameworks are for big companies or tech companies or for product managers with fully staffed analytics teams, not for you in your specific situation with your specific kind of work. So you file it away somewhere as interesting, but probably not applicable, and then go back to whatever you were doing before. Third, and this is the one that actually trips people up the most, is the politics. Even if you build a scoring model, if the organization is not committed to using it honestly, the model becomes nothing more than a decoration. The real blocker is not the framework, it's the culture. In this episode, we're going to address all three of these. And I'm going to explain each framework in plain English, walk through real examples for each, and give you some guidelines on exactly when to use each of the three tools. And we'll also talk about what to do about the culture problem, because it doesn't go away on its own. By the time we're done, you'll have a system, not a concept, not a theory, but a real usable system that you can take back to your team this week. We're going to start off with RICE, R-I-C-E, because it's the most widely used formal prioritization model in product management. And it translates remarkably well to almost any other context. RICE was originally developed by the team at Intercom to help them evaluate and compare feature requests and product opportunities without letting personal preference run the show. As I've mentioned, RICE is an acronym: Reach, Impact, Confidence, and Effort. You score every project across these four dimensions and then calculate a single number. The higher number wins. When you break it down, it's a relatively simple concept, but it's genuinely powerful in practice. Breaking down the four components is the first step. Reach is the first dimension. How many people will this project affect within a defined time period? You want a specific number, not a vague category here. As an example, if you're estimating how many users would benefit from a new feature, look at the usage data for related existing features. If you're addressing a process improvement of some variety, count the number of employees or transactions that would be affected per month. The tighter the estimate, the more meaningful the score is. Impact is the second dimension. For each person this project reaches, how much will it move the needle? RICE uses a deliberate scale here. 0.25 means a minimal impact. 0.5 is low, 1 is medium, 2 is high, and 3 is massive. And this is intentionally subjective because impact estimates generally require judgment. The framework doesn't try to eliminate that subjectivity. It just makes you commit to a number and then defend it in the room, which is where the really useful conversation happens. Confidence is the third dimension, and this is the one that most teams underuse. How certain are you about your reach and impact estimates? Express it as a percentage. If you have solid, quantitative data, customer research, and comparable prior projects to reference, you might legitimately claim 90% confidence. If you're working from a couple of random customer conversations and your gut, that might get you a 50 or 40% confidence rating. The confidence score serves an important purpose. It penalizes overconfidence. A project that scores beautifully on reach and impact, but carries a 40% confidence, ends up with a much more modest overall RICE score. And that's a feature, not a bug. Effort is the fourth dimension, and it's also the only cost variable in the entire formula. How many person months will this project require? Include everyone involved, not just the builders. Design time, project management, testing, stakeholder review, all of it. The more effort a project demands relative to its value, the lower its score. So now we get into the math. The RICE formula is reach multiplied by impact, multiplied by confidence, and then divided by effort. That is your RICE score. Let me walk you through a real comparison so you can see what this looks like with actual numbers. As has become our custom, we'll use Toby's Taco Truck as our baseline. Toby's Taco Truck serves about 500 customers per week, and he has two potential improvements to choose between, and he needs a principled way to make the call. The first option is a contactless payment system. Right now, Toby's Taco Truck is cash and card swipe only. Tap to pay would affect essentially every customer. So the reach is 500. The impact would be real. Shorter wait times, faster throughput during the lunch rush, and fewer customers walking away when the line is long. So Toby rates this at a 2. He's also spoken with enough customers and reviewed enough wait time data to feel 80% confident in these estimates. Getting the system set up will take about a month of his own time, plus the vendor setup. In that case, effort equals 1 person month. So that math worked out to 500 times 2 times 0.8 divided by 1 equals 800. The second potential project is a loyalty rewards card. Customers get a punch card, and on their 10th visit, they get a free taco. The reach is still 500 since Toby offers it to everyone. The impact is more modest, let's say 1, since it primarily affects return visit behavior rather than the immediate experience of any given customer. Toby is a little less confident here, maybe 60%, because he doesn't have any hard data on what percentage of his customers are regulars versus the one-time walk-ins. Building out the system, printing the cards, tracking everything will take about 3 person months. And the RICE math, 500 times 1 times 0.6 divided by 3 equals 100. So the contactless payment project had a RICE score of 800, and the loyalty card had a score of 100. Not even close. Here's what I want you to really notice about that example. Before running RICE, you might have argued that the loyalty card is the more strategic investment. It builds relationships and drives repeat business. It has a certain charm, and it might be worth doing later. But right now, on limited time and limited resources, RICE surfaces where the actual return is. The math cleared up what the conversation would have argued about for an hour. RICE works best in environments when you have reasonable estimates for at least 2 of the 4 dimensions. Product teams with good analytics can usually nail this with no problem. Service businesses and internal teams might need to be a little more creative about what reach means in their specific context. Things like customer count, employee count, transactions per month, and revenue influenced. All of those are valid proxies for reach. The main risk with RICE is false precision. The formula looks rigorous and it has a calculation. It spits out a number. But if the inputs are gut feeling dressed up as data, the output is still gut feeling, but now wearing a lab coat. The confidence dimension helps address this, but only if teams are genuinely honest when scoring it. Building a team norm of be conservative with confidence is worth doing before your first RICE session. Our second method is WSJF, which stands for Weighted Shortest Job First. And it comes from the Scaled Agile framework and was built on research into product flow economics. The core idea is the cost of delay, and it shifts the framing of prioritization in a way that I think can be really powerful. Here is the real insight at the heart of WSJF. Not all project value is stable over time. Some projects deliver the same value whether you do them now or in 4 months. Other projects can lose value fast. A compliance feature that needs to be live before a regulatory deadline is worth nothing if it ships a week late. A competitive feature loses ground every day that your competitor has it and you do not. WSJF captures this time dimension and builds it into the score. The math formula here, WSJF score equals the cost of delay divided by the job duration. The highest score goes first. Now, cost of delay itself is a composite of 3 different components. Each of those is rated on a relative scale, typically 1 to 10, where the ratings reflect the work relative to each other in your current set of decisions, not some absolute universal benchmark. The first component here is user and business value. This is relatively familiar. What direct value does this work deliver? A feature that meaningfully improves the core user experience scores high, but a minor UI adjustment would score low. The second component is time criticality. This is where WSJF distinguishes itself from most other frameworks out there. How does the value of this work change over time? Is there a deadline, a market window, or a competitive threat? Something in the external environment that makes doing this sooner meaningfully better than doing it later. A project with high time criticality loses significant value if it's delayed. A project with low time criticality can wait without much consequence. The third component is risk reduction and opportunity enablement. Does this work remove a significant business risk or unlock capabilities that other work depends on? For example, a security patch might have a modest direct value to users, but its risk reduction score could be extremely high. Or a piece of foundational infrastructure that 5 other projects are waiting on has high opportunity enablement value, even if no end user ever sees it. Add those 3 scores together to get your cost of delay, and then divide that by the job duration, and you get your score. Let me walk you through a team-level comparison to show you how this actually plays out. A software team has 3 items in their backlog, all competing for the next sprint. The first item on the table is a new customer analytics dashboard. The team rates user value at 8, since customers have been asking for better reporting. Time criticality at 2, since the existing reporting does work fine and there is no external deadline. Risk reduction at a 3, so that gives you a cost of delay at 13. This project is estimated to take 4 weeks to complete, so WSJF is 13 divided by 4 at 3.25. Second item up for debate is a critical API security update. The user value is low with a score of 3, since users do not experience this directly. But time criticality is a 10 because the team knows that there is an active vulnerability that creates exposure every day. And risk reduction is at a 9, so the cost of delay is 22. This patch is estimated to take 1 week, so the WSJF equals 22 divided by 1, which still gives you 22. Third project up for debate is a mobile onboarding redesign. User value at 7, time criticality has been given a 4, since there is competitive pressure, but no hard deadline. Risk reduction and opportunity enablement is a 5, since better onboarding enables downstream retention improvements that the team has been wanting to measure. Add those up and you get a cost of delay at 16. And the duration for this particular project is estimated at 3 weeks. Take your 16, divide it by 3, and you get 5.33. So the ranking at this point is the security patch first, the mobile onboarding second, and the dashboard third. The real joy here is what WSJF enables. When someone in the planning meeting says, but the dashboard is what customers are asking for, so that should go first. The team doesn't have to debate whose gut instinct is better. They can point to the numbers. The security patch has a WSJF score of 22. That dashboard is at 3.25. The cost of delaying the patch for 4 weeks while building the dashboard is quantifiable and significant. That conversation is fundamentally different from we think the patch should come first. WSJF is especially powerful in agile environments when you are sequencing work across multiple sprints and in any context where regulatory deadlines, competitive timing, or compounding technical risk are all major variables. If time sensitivity is one of the most important factors in your decisions, WSJF will serve you far better than RICE. The pitfall to guard against is time criticality inflation. Every team has people who rate everything as urgently time critical. Doing that flattens the score differences and defeats the purpose of the entire framework. Be explicit about what a 10 in time criticality actually means for your team and make them document it. Something like a score of 10 means we face a regulatory fine, a data breach, or lose a major client if this is not done in 2 weeks. Anchor that scale to specific things before you start scoring and hold people to it. The third framework is Moscow, spelled just like the city in Russia, but with little O's. Moscow is my favorite framework to run with groups, not because it's the most mathematically elegant, but because it generates the most productive conversations. It is also, in my experience, the most frequently butchered by teams that skip the most important part of the framework. Where RICE and WSJF give you a numerical ranking, Moscow gives you alignment. It's a classification system, not a scoring model. And its power comes from the explicit agreement that it forces a team to reach. The 4 categories of Moscow: must have, should have, could have, and won't have this time. The odd capitalization is intentional, and it builds the mnemonic. The first letter of each word spells Moscow, which is how you remember it. Let's go through each of those 4 categories and explain them properly. Must have is the most important and oftentimes the most abused of the 4 categories. These are genuinely non-negotiable deliverables. The project, the sprint, or the release does not succeed without them. If a must-have doesn't ship, the whole thing fails. I want to be very clear about what this means because most teams will interpret it loosely. Must-have does not mean really important. It does not mean we'd really like this. It means without this, there is no release. There is no product. The project fails. That there is the test. Should have covers items that are high value, but are not necessarily critical to the minimum viable delivery. The project works without them, but it is meaningfully better with them. When timelines get tight, should haves are the first things that you revisit. They're not sacrosanct. Could have is the nice to have category. These items add value if time permits, but they are the first things to get cut when pressure builds. Classifying something as a could have is not dismissing it. It's being honest about its relative priority given current constraints. Could haves often become must haves in the next release cycle. Won't have this time is the category that most teams either skip entirely or use incorrectly, and it is without question the most important category of all. And here's why. In most organizations, scope creep does not occur because someone deliberately decided to add things. It happens because nobody formally excluded anything. Every idea discussed, but not explicitly ruled out, remains implicitly in scope. It drifts back in. It shows up on a Friday afternoon as, can we just quickly squeeze this in? Without a won't have list, there is no authority to push back with. The won't have category makes the exclusion explicit. The team is saying that, hey, we've considered this and we have agreed that it will not be part of this release. It isn't being abandoned, it's being deferred. That agreement is organizational infrastructure. It prevents a specific class of conversation that wastes enormous amounts of time. Before we move on, I want to give you a practical rule for running Moscow sessions that actually work. Must-haves should account for no more than 60% of your available capacity. If your must-have list eats up 80 to 90% of the timeline, you have two problems. Problem number one is there is no buffer for anything that goes sideways. And we all know that something always goes sideways. Problem number two is most of what you called a must-have probably isn't. It's a should-have wearing a disguise because nobody wanted to be the person who downgraded it. The 60% rule forces an honest conversation in the room. When you tell a stakeholder that their item needs to move from must-have to should-have because the must-have column is already at capacity, they have two productive options. Number one, they can make the case that it is truly non-negotiable, in which case something else has to move down. Or they can accept the should-have label. Either outcome is useful. Both are better than leaving the conversation unresolved and letting the ambiguity become someone else's problem. Let's bring Toby's taco truck back for this one because this example is particularly satisfying. Toby is planning a new catering menu for corporate clients. He has brainstormed 14 potential menu items. And the initial instinct is to offer all 14 of them because more options means happier customers, right? And the answer is not exactly. More options mean more complexity, more ingredient sourcing, more prep time, and a higher probability of an embarrassing moment at someone's office lunch. As part of this planning process, Toby runs a Moscow session. The must-haves are the classic street taco lineup, the ones that define the truck's identity. A vegetarian option because customer data shows that roughly 30% of corporate attendees have dietary restrictions. And without these two things, the catering product doesn't make any sense. The should-haves, a sides menu, chips and salsa, rice and beans, a seasonal special to give to regular clients seeking something fresh. All of those will add real value to the catering experience. The could have, a premium Wagyu beef taco at a higher price point for upscale client events. It's an interesting opportunity, but it's not essential to the launch. And the won't have for this launch is a full dessert menu and branded merch. Both are things that Toby wants to offer. Who wouldn't want a Toby's Taco Truck t-shirt? But just not now. After this exercise, the catering menu launches on schedule. It is focused, executable, and profitable on day one. The dessert menu becomes a Q2 initiative with a concrete plan behind it, rather than a half-executed idea bolted on to an already complicated launch. I want to give you some tips for running Moscow sessions effectively. Set the rules before you open the session. Tell the group explicitly what must-have actually means. The project literally fails without it. Not, well, this is very important. Fails. Start with that word and keep coming back to it. Manage the must-have takeover actively. In rooms with strong personalities, everything gravitates toward must-have because nobody wants to be the person who said their project was less important. A good facilitator asks the same question for every must-have candidate. If this specific item does not ship, does the project fail? If the answer is anything other than an immediate yes, It belongs lower on the scale. I would also encourage you to celebrate the won't have column. Seriously, when a team explicitly excludes something from scope with the agreement of everyone in the room, that's a win. That is a protected sprint. That is a defined boundary. Teams that run Moscow well often feel a wave of relief when the won't have column fills up, and that relief signals a manageable project. Now that we've covered all three frameworks, let me show you how to run them as a single integrated system rather than just standalone tools. The sequence I would recommend is Moscow first, then Rice or WSJF, and then a final human judgment check. You start with Moscow because it's the fastest way to remove the noise from the system. Running Rice or WSJF on 40 backlog items is a significant time investment. Running Moscow on 40 items takes 90 minutes and leaves you with maybe 10 or 15 items that generally warrant a detailed analysis. You're now doing the rigorous scoring on only the things that matter. Then you apply Rice or WSJF to your must-have and should-have items. If your environment is data rich and impact is the primary variable, use Rice. If timing, sequence, and cost of delay are the dominant factors, use WSJF. If you're not sure which applies, run both and see where the rankings agree and where they disagree. Those disagreements are usually where the most important conversations tend to live. Once you've completed that, you do a final human judgment check. Look at the ranked list. Does it make sense given everything that you know about your organization? Is there anything that the model missed? Maybe a project scores low, but it's a prerequisite for 3 other high-scoring projects. Maybe a project scores high, but it requires a key person who is already fully committed. The models do not know what you know. The final human review is how you close that gap. Run this process once and you will achieve a better prioritization outcome than you ever have with the default approach. Run it every planning cycle and you'll build something more valuable than any single framework. A shared language for making difficult judgment calls together. I want to close this out with something honest because I think it would be a disservice to you not to say it. These frameworks will not solve all of your prioritization problems. Specifically, they will not solve the problem of a leader who is not interested in letting data challenge their preferences. If the person at the top of the org chart decides priorities based solely on their instincts, and that decision is not open for discussion, a Rice score is not going to move the needle. The framework becomes a performance of rigor than the real thing. What I have seen work in those situations is to start small in the spaces where you do have influence. Run Rice on a set of projects within your team's control. Then share those scores openly. Let the data speak. Build a track record of better decisions. When the framework produces a result that turns out to be right and it's easy to explain, point to it. When it surfaces something that the gut would have missed, point to that. Credibility is earned one decision at a time. And the organizations that have made the biggest leaps in prioritization discipline are not usually the ones that rolled out a company-wide framework on day one. They are the ones where a few people built a track record of good calls with good data, and eventually others wanted in on that process. Start where you have permission and then build outward from there. Let me wrap up with something concrete that you can do immediately. This week, pick your most congested backlog, the one where your team spends the most energy debating what to work on next. Block out 90 minutes, get the right people in the room, and run a Moscow session. Your only goal is to reach agreement on 4 lists: what must ship, what should ship, what could ship if time allows, and what is explicitly not in scope for this cycle. Then take your must-have and should-have items and spend an hour scoring them with RICE or WSJF, whichever fits in your environment. Don't worry about getting perfect inputs. A good enough first pass beats no pass at all. You're looking for a ranked list, not a dissertation. Then share that list with your stakeholders. Make the scoring visible. When someone pushes back on the ranking, do not defend the result. Ask them to show you where the inputs are wrong. If you think this project should rank higher, let's look at its confidence estimate. What data would change that number? That kind of conversation is worth 10 times as much as any argument about whose intuition is better. That's the system. Moscow to filter, RICE or WSJF to rank, human judgment to close the gap. All with transparency to make it defensible. If this episode was useful to you, there's a lot more where this came from. Head on over to toby-talks.com to find the full content library. If you're listening to this as a podcast, a quick review wherever you listen makes a real difference for the show. It takes about 30 seconds, and it helps new people find their way here. If you're watching on YouTube, mash on that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss the next episode. I'm Toby Hoy, and this is Toby Talks. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next one.